Are you living in the Moon Palace? Hello, my friends. Welcome back. So, I have a story for you guys today, a bit of a different sort of story. This is a Innu folk tale called The Moon Palace. So, the reason why I'm telling this story today is that one of you guys, one of my Patreon members, reached out to me having experienced a profound sense of loss and grief and bereavement. You know who you are. And this person asked me if I knew any folktale or piece of myth that might be able to put that in a mythic context or help in some way with the process. My first thought was I didn't know, but I would have a look. But then it occurred to me that at that very moment that person messaged me, I was reading a folktale, an Innu folktale, that seemed to be tiptoeing around this idea of grief and grieving, possibly. So I thought I'd tell that story for you guys today. Long ago, long, long ago, in the far, far north, there was a small settlement of tents by the sea. Now, winter was closing in, just like it's closing in now. The days were getting shorter, the snow was piling up in the hills, in the forests, and there was an old couple in that settlement that looked at the horizon and looked at the winter ahead, and they could see their own death. So, they thought of a way to avoid this. They decided that they would marry their young daughter that was just on the cusp of womanhood. They would marry her off to one of the young men of the village, get a bit of, muscle around the place, chop some wood, go hunting, fishing, and maybe, just maybe, that old couple would make it through the winter. Times were hard then. So, the declaration was made, and various suitors trudged their way across the snow to that young woman's tent to present themselves. But none of them she found suitable. They were either too ugly or too stupid or too arrogant or just too boring and local to be of interest to this young girl. Now, what this young woman really liked to do, she was an independent thinker, you see. What she really liked to do was walk. So, in the middle of this audition process of the suitors of the village, she took herself off for a long walk across the tundra. And she was walking for a long time over the hills and through the forests, a long, 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 long way from the settlement, when she came across a head lying in the snow. Just a head. No body, mind. And she looked down, and that head looked up, and the head said, "Hello." And she said, "Hello." And they began to have a conversation, the most interesting, fertile, witty, dazzling conversation she had ever had with anyone. The hours just whittled away like minutes, and soon the sun was starting to dip low into the horizon. But she wasn't done conversing with this interesting head yet. So what did she do? Well, simple. She scooped that head up and took it back to her tent, and she placed it on a pillow where they continued their conversation. And the laughter and conversation, like a little trickle, like a little stream, rippled across the settlement. And Mum and Dad, in their tent nearby, smiled and chuckled to themselves and nodded and said to each other, "Ah, our daughter has found herself a mate." But the next day, they were somewhat affronted because the conversation had continued and they were not granted an audience with this new suitor, their future son-in-law. And the conversation continued and continued until midday, and Dad was getting increasingly put out by this, until finally his daughter had to go down to the river to collect water, the river flowing into the sea nearby. So he took his opportunity. He opened his tent flap. He trudged across the snow to his daughter's tent. He opened the tent flap and peered in. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw there. Just a head sat on a pillow. And the head said, "It's not what it looks like." And the dad was so enraged and fearful and panicked. What did he do? He picked up a stick from the fire. He walked over and rammed it right into the eye socket of that head and screwed it in. Blood poured from the eye socket of that head, poured onto the fire, put the fire out, poured onto the snow. Blood on snow. It's a very old image. And then the head, buoyed on a river of its own blood, rolled down away from the settlement on a river of blood down to the sea, where it rolled down onto the sea bed, where it joined a whole community of other heads just like it at the bottom of the seabed that kind of rolled over to make room for this new head. Now the girl, she had seen and heard all this from her position by the river, and she squealed, she screamed, and she ran down and leapt into the sea and swam down, deeper down, following the trail of blood deep down into the dark, where she found her beloved, betrothed spirit husband, this severed head. And she said, "Oh, my love, my love, my love, what has happened to you?" And the head said, "My dear, it looks like your father doesn't approve of our marriage." Blood still pouring from his eye socket. He said, "I cannot be where you are. I cannot be where you are. And you cannot be down here beneath the sea. If we cannot be together, then it's goodbye. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and I love you." And with a wail of grief, that young woman shot up to the surface, shot up, bursting out into the air. But then she did not return to the settlement. No, she kept going up, 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 up into the rarefied atmosphere until she found herself on the moon. And there was no one else there. It was deserted. She was completely alone. But there was, in the distance, glimmering in the earthlight, a palace, a kind of castle made of glass or crystal. It was the Moon Palace, and she made herself a home there. And she watched the affairs of Earth from high on high on high. With perfect clarity, she could see everything moving, but she wasn't affected by it. She wasn't attached to it or moved by anything. It's like everything was behind a sheet of glass. She could not be touched. She could not be hurt. She could not truly feel. Now, a long time she had been in the Moon Palace. Perhaps you are in the Moon Palace right now and did not realize it until this moment. Time passes differently in the Moon Palace. Had she been there days, months, years, thousands of years? But one day, down in the world, she saw 3 hunters around a seal hole in the ice, and they were fishing. And as is the custom, the 3 of them, offered up their prayers to the gods, to the great mystery, to the great day that dawns. They offered up their prayers, their thanks. And so lyrical were the prayers of the 3rd hunter, and he was handsome too, but so wonderful was his way with language that for the first time in a long time, something stirred in the Moon Girl's heart. And he offered up his prayers to the sky and threw a handful of salt water so high into the sky that a few drops just licked the underside of the moon, and something in her shifted. And she felt an urge, a desire, the first time in her long exile on the Moon Palace, to return to Earth. And just as soon as she had that intent, that desire, suddenly there was someone standing next to her in the Moon Palace. She turned. It was an old woman. the old crone that lives in the moon. And that old woman said to the moon girl, "My child," she said, "how long do you think it will take you to get back down to Earth?" And the moon girl said, "I don't know, 2, 3 weeks." The old woman of the moon said, "You are 3 steps away. You've always only ever been 3 steps away. But, my child, I need to tell you something very important. When you are coming back down to Earth, it is vital that you keep your eyes open. Do not shut your eyes even for a minute." The moon girl, she steadied herself and she took 1 step and she was off the moon. She was in a void of darkness, but she kept her eyes open, fixed on the earth, the tapestry down far below. 2, she took another step, and the next step was even easier than the first, through the rarefied atmosphere of Earth. 3, the third step was a crunch of her foot on snow, fresh snow, the first time she had felt anything, and she could smell the air of the tundra, and for just a second she smiled and let her eyes close, and her shape changed. She erupted and became all the spiders and all the spider webs in all the world. She became the dew on the leaves, the sunlight rippling on the water, the seal moving beneath the slate grey waves. She became the great day that dawns and the light that fills the world. So there's a lot to unpack in that folktale, and I don't necessarily want to unpack it too much. I think you can reduce a folktale to less than the sum of their parts if you do that. But this idea of the Moon Palace resonates me. I lost my mum last year, as some of you will know, and for a long time, immediately afterwards, I felt like I was underwater. I couldn't hear, I couldn't see anything. But for a long time after that, and maybe still now, I don't know, I felt like I was behind glass, like nothing really, like I couldn't really feel anything. I was in the Moon Palace, I think, perhaps the Moon Palace is one way of dealing with grief, with pain, with loss, with suffering. But sooner or later, we've got to come back down to earth, and it's better to do it with our eyes open. There's also this idea of the disembodied head in this tale, which could mean a lot of things. In a shamanic context, this could mean a sort of like a spirit partnership for a shaman, perhaps, but also just the mystic. The mystic that isn't accepted by the village, by the normal. And I'm sure a lot of you feel this way, that you're just not maybe I think we all feel this sometimes, just not accepted by the sort of mainstreams of society, because actually our hearts and minds are set on sort of a different set of ideals. Perhaps there's a few things going on there. This idea of spider webs and spiders as well. That's very interesting, because it almost seems quite a dark end. But spiders, they're creative creatures, they're protective creatures, and a lot of Native American folklore, they and a lot of sort of folklore across the world, the spider has all the stories and it works. So perhaps in these dark times, it's important to throw yourself like seed, like spider webs, into the work, and just keep working, keep making, keep doing things for others, even if we're suffering. maybe that's some positive spin, if you like, on this imagery. Anyway, my friends, and particularly that person who reached out to me on Patreon, I don't know if that's any help, but that is certainly the story that I was reading when you reached out to me. So sometimes it's good to follow these synchronicities, these spider webs. Uh, if you're watching this video, you're probably already a Patreon member of mine, because I think initially I'm just going to release this video on Patreon. If you're not on Patreon and you're watching this on YouTube, then it's probably sometime in the future. I don't know, some weeks or months in the future of me making this video. So if you do want to follow me on Patreon, then do please reach out to me if there's a particular story you want to hear, or something that's happening in your life that perhaps folklore might be able to hold up a mirror to, because that is, I believe, what myth and folklore does. It's to put the experiences of our lives in a greater mythic context, because we're not alone. All right, my friends, thank you very much. I'll see you again soon.